Hello, my dear students. How are you? I hope all are you good. Welcome back to another class. So today let me start English chapter number 14, Stuck by an Iceberg. So the SS Titanic set sail on her maiden voyage from Southampton to New York on April 10, 1912. She was the largest ship that had ever been built and was thought to be unsinkable. मतलब जो ये टाइटेनिक की बात यहाँ पे हो रही है कि ये ऐसा पहला जहाज था जिसको ये सोच के बनाया गया था, कहा गया था कि ये कभी नहीं डूबेगा. On the night of April 1415, the Titanic struck an iceberg. है ना, ये एक आइसबर्ग से टकराया था 50 miles southeast of Newfoundland. The collision tore a 300-foot gash in the ship's hull and the ship sank in about 2 hours. 2 घंटे में ये डूब गया था. The lifeboats had less than half of the approximately 2,200 persons on board. 750 survivors were picked up by the liner Carpathia. Archibald Gracie was among the last to leave the stricken ship. I was now working with the crew at the davits on the starboard side forward, adjusting them ready for lowering the angulated board from the roof of the officer's house to the board deck below. So one of the crew on the roof sang out, "Has any passenger a knife?" I took mine out of my pocket and tossed it to him, saying, "Here is a small penknife, if that will do any good." It appeared to me then that there was more trouble than there ought to have been in removing the canvas cover and cutting the boat loose, and that some means should have been available for doing this without delay. Okay, so meantime, 4 or 5 long oars were placed fastened against the walls of the officer's house to break the fall of the boat, which was pushed from the roof and slipped with a crash down on the boat deck, smashing several of the oars. Grace Smith and I scurried out of the way and stood leaning against with our back against the rail, watching this procedure and feeling anxious lest the boat be injured so as to cause her to leak in the water. अब उसमें क्या हुआ था, वाटर लीक होने लगा था उसके अंदर. About this time, I recall that an officer on the roof of the house called down to the crew at this quarter. जब मैंने ये सब देखा तो मैंने वो ऑफिसर को ऊपर छत पर बुलाया. Are there any seamen down there among you? I, sir, I was the response, and quite a number left aboard deck to assist in what I suppose to have been the cutting rules of the other angle-hearted boat up there on the roof. Again, I hear an inquiry for another knife. I don't know who gave it to him. Meanwhile, boat B was thrown down to the boat deck and was the one on which he and I eventually climbed. The crew had thrown the angle-hearted boat to the deck, but I did not understand why they were so long about launching it. Unless they were waiting to cut the other one loose and launch them both at the same time. 2 young men of the crew, nice looking, dressed in white, one tall and the other smaller, were coolly debating as to whether the compartments would hold to ship afloat. They were standing with their backs to the array, looking on at the rest of the crew, and I recall asking one of them why he did not assist. So at this time, there were the other passengers around, but Clint Smith was the only one associated with me here to the last. It was about this time. So 15 minutes after the launching of the last lifeboat on the port side, that I heard a noise that spread consternation among us all. This was no less than the water striking the bridge and gurgling up the hatchway forward. It seemed momentarily as if it would reach the boat deck. It appeared as if it would take the crew a long time to turn the England and angle-hearted boat right side up and life it over the rail. And there were so many ready to board her that she would have been swamped. Probably taking these points into consideration, Clint Smith made the proposition that we should leave and go toward the stem still on starboard side, so he started and I followed immediately after him. We had taken but a few steps in the direction indicated, when there arose before us from the decks below a mass of humanity, several lines deep, covering the boat deck, facing us and completely blocking our passage towards the stern. There were women in the crowd as well as men, and they seemed to be steerage passengers who had just come up from the decks below. Instantly, when they saw us and the water on the deck chasing us from behind, they turned in the opposite direction toward the stern. This brought them at that point plumb against the iron fence and railing which divided the first and second cabin passengers. Even among these people, there was no hysterical cry or evidence of panic, but of the agony of it. Clint Smith and I instantly saw that we could make no progress ahead, and with the water flow following us behind over the deck, we were in a desperate place. I can never forget the exit point on the ship where he and I were located was at the opening of the angle made by the walls of the officer's house, and only a short distance about the Titanic's forward expansion joint. Clay Smith was immediately on my left, near the apex of the angle, and our backs were turned toward the ship's rail and the sea, looking up toward the roof of the officer's house. I saw a man to the right of me and above, lying on his stomach on the roof, with his legs dangling over. Clay Smith jumped to reach this roof, and I promptly followed. The efforts of both of us failed. I was loaded down with heavy long-skirted overcoat and Norfolk coat beneath, with clumsy life preserver over on, which made my jump for short. As I came down, the water struck my right side. I crouched down into preparatory to jumping with it and rose as if on the crest of a wave on the seahorse. This expedient brought the attainment of the object I had in view. I was able to reach the roof and the iron railing that is there along the edge of it, and pulled myself over on top of the officer's house on my stomach near the base of the second funnel. The feat which I instinctively accomplished was the simple one familiar to all bathers in the surf at the seashore. I had no time to advise Clint Smith to adopt it. To my utter dismay, I hasty glanced to my left and right, sure he had not followed my example, and that the wave, if I may call it such, which had mounted me to the roof, had completely covered him as well as all people on both sides of me, including the man I had first seen on the roof. I was thus parted forever from my friend T. Smith, with whom I had agreed to remain to the last struggle. I felt almost a pang of responsibility for our separation, but he was not in sight and there was no chance of re-entering assistance. His ultimate fate is a matter of conjecture, hammered in by the mass of people toward the stem and cornered in the locality previously described. It seemed certain that as the ship wheeled over and sank, his body was caught in the angle or in the coils of rope and the appurtenances on the deck and borne down to the depths below. There could not be a braver man than James Clint Smith. He was a embodiment of coolness and courage during the whole period of the disaster. While in constant touch and communication with him at the various points on the ship, when we were together on the tragic night, he never showed the slightest sign of fear, but manifested the same quiet, imperturbable manner so well known to all his friends who joined with his family in mourning his loss. His conduct should be an inspiration to us all and an appropriate epitaph to his memory, taken from the words of Chris Woodby. Greater love hath no man. So then this, that a man laid down his life for his friend. As we gazed awestruck, the Titanic tilted slightly up, revolving apparently about a center of gravity just astern of amidships until she attained a vertical upright position, and there she remained, motionless, as she swung up her lights, which had shone without a flicker all night, went out suddenly, then came on again for a single flash, and then went out altogether. And as they did so, there came a noise which many people wrongly, I think, have described as an explosion. It has always seemed to me that it was nothing but the engines and machinery coming loose from their place and bearing and falling through the compartments, smashing everything in their way. It was partly a roar, partly a groan, partly a rattle, and partly a sash, and it was not a sudden roar as an explosion would be. So it went on successfully for some seconds, possibly 15 or 20, as the heavy machinery dropped down to the bottom. Now the bows of the ship. I suppose it fell through the end and sank first before the ship, but it was a noise no one had heard before and no one wishes to hear again. It was stupendous, stupendous. As it came to us along the water, it was as if all the heavy things one could think of had been thrown downstairs from the top of a house, smashing each other and the stairs and everything in a way. With this second wind underwater, there came to me a new lease of life and strength, until finally I noticed by the increase of light that I was drawing near to the surface. Though it was not daylight, the clear starlit night made a noticeable difference in the degree of light immediately below the surface of the water. As I was rising, I came in contact with ascending wreckage, but the only thing I struck of material size was a small plank which I tucked under my right arm. This circumstance brought with it the reflection that it was advisable for me to secure what best I could to keep me afloat on the surface until succor arrived. When my head at last rose above the water, I detected a piece of wreckage like a wooden crate, and I eagerly seized it as nucleus of the projected raft to be constructed. Looking about me, I could see no Titanic in sight. She had entirely disappeared beneath the calm surface of the ocean, and without a sign of any wave that the sea had swallowed her up with all her precious belongings was indicated by the slight sound of a gulp behind me as the water closed over her. The length of time that I was underwater can be estimated by the fact that I sank with her, and when I came up, there was no ship in sight. What impressed me at the time, my eyes beheld the horrible scene, was a thin, light, grey, smoky vapor that hung like a pall a few feet above the broad expanse of sea that was covered with a mass of tangled wreckage. That it was a tangible vapor and not a product of imagination, I feel well assured. It may have been caused by smoke or steam rising to the surface around the area where the ship had sunk. So at any rate, it produced a supernatural effect. Add to this within the area described, which was as far as my eyes could reach, there arose to the sky the most horrible sounds ever heard by mortal men except by those of us who survived this terrible tragedy. The agonizing cries of death from over 1,000 throats, the wails and groans of the suffering, the shrieks of the terror-stricken, and she awful gaspings for breath of those in the last throes of drawing. None of us will ever forget to our dying day. Help, help, bought a hour, and my God, for the heart-rending cries and shrieks of men which floated to us over the surface of the dark waters continuously for the next hour, but as time went on growing weaker and weaker until they died out entirely. As I clung to my wreckage, I noticed just in front of me, a few yards away, a group of three bodies with heads in the water, face downward, and just behind me to my right, another body, all giving unmistakable evidence of being drowned. Possibly these had gone down to the depths as I had done, but did not have the lung power that I had to hold the breath and swim underwater, and an accomplishment which I had practiced from my school days. So there was no one alive or struggling in the water or calling for aid within the immediate vicinity of where I balanced myself on top of it, but I turned over in a somersault with it underwater and up to the surface again. Spied to my left, a considerable distance away, a better vehicle of escape than the wooden crate on which my attempt to ride had resulted in a second ducking. What I saw was no less than the same angle-hearted on sailboat to whose launching I had lent my efforts until the water broke upon the ship's boat deck where we were. On top of this upturned boat, half reclining on her bottom, were now more than a dozen men, whom by their dress I took to be all members of the crew of the ship. Thank God I did not hesitate a moment in discarding the friendly crate that had been my first aid. I stepped out through the wreckage and after a considerable swim, reached the port side amidships of this angle-hearted boat, which with her companions wherever utilized its boat service in saving the lives of many others. When I reached the side of the boat, I met with a doubtful reception, and as no extending hand was held out to me, I grabbed by the muscle of the left arm a young member of the crew nearest and facing me. At the same time, I threw my right leg over the boat as straddle, pulling myself above. With a friendly lift to my foot given by someone Eastern, as I assumed, I had a cycling position with them on the bottom of the capsized boat. Then after me came a dozen other swimmers who clambered around and we helped above. So among them was one completely exhausted who came on the same port side as me. I pulled him in and he laid face downward in front of me for several hours until just before dawn he was able to stand up with the rest of us. The moment of getting aboard this upturned boat was one of supreme mental relief more so than any other until I reached the deck of the hospitable Carpathia on the next morning. So this is the story of Titan. Okay. So everyone, the chapter is in here. I hope you all are very well understand full chapter. We will meet in next class. Thank you everyone.